Hello, I'm Dr. Deb, and welcome to my channel, The Everyday Therapist. Today, we are going to continue to talk about trauma. And in the previous video, I described why studying trauma and exploring it is very important because we've all been through a certain amount of trauma. So today, I'm going to cover the following topics: the different kinds of trauma, the ways people respond to trauma, and some of the physiology behind it. Now, and at the end, I'm going to explain another technique for addressing trauma and stress in your own life. So first of all, let's talk about the different kinds of trauma. First, there is acute trauma. An acute trauma situation is one in which one thing happens and it causes the person to feel overwhelmed or scared. For example, if a person's in a car accident and has not had anything else happen major in their lives, that would be an example of trauma, the way the person feels about it. In my experience, working with clients, someone who's been through an accident, say a car accident, and may have sustained minor injuries, but still running into another car, having another vehicle hit that particular vehicle, can result in the person feeling afraid, not wanting to drive ever again, being afraid of certain colors of vehicles, a wide range of things that happen because of the trauma, because of the situation. That's acute trauma. Now we can have chronic trauma, and that is a situation where a person goes through various trauma incidents over and over and over again. So, for example, say somebody was raised in a very dysfunctional family where, as a child, the person was criticized a lot, maybe physically abused, but it happened in a very repetitive way. That can lead to chronic trauma. That person is always on edge and is waiting for something to happen. Now, along with that kind of chronic trauma, we can have complex trauma or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And in post-traumatic stress disorder, that consists of all of those after effects from a traumatic incident. And they can last for several years, 2 years, 3 years, or longer, and will require a lot of treatment. The other kinds of trauma also can require treatment, but potentially of different ways, different matters. Now, we've all heard about probably flight and fight responses to traumatic or stressful situations. Well, that's true. But the thing is, humans have more than just those two types of responses. There's fight, which means if a person feels cornered or trapped in a situation, the person will lash out. Or flight, meaning the person tries to get away. But there's also freeze. That's when the person just becomes rigid and immobile. Sort of like when you see, you're driving down the road and a deer runs out in front of you and stops and just stands there. That is an example of freeze. And then finally, there is what's called collapse. And that's when somebody becomes so overwhelmed that the brain thinks, oh my God, I'm about to die. And so the body totally collapses. Sort of like what an opossum would do when scared. And that latter situation is much rarer, but it does occur. Now, the kinds of responses that happen are dependent on the person's stage in life. For example, fight as a response to a traumatic or a stressful situation tends to occur mostly with men and boys over the age of, say, 6 or 7. And that is because a certain amount of testosterone needs to be in the body before one really can evoke that fight type of response. Doesn't mean that, say, women don't have it. It's just that women tend to be less likely to. Now, Yeah, if you look at, say, very young children, they will run and hide or they will freeze. And typically that's what one would see in younger children, as I said, and potentially any human who doesn't have a certain amount of testosterone in the body. Okay, so those are the 4 types of responses to a traumatic, stressful situation that we see. And we see them, same sorts of responses in other animals. I mean, dogs will fight or try to run away, depending on the situation. When they become sort of overwhelmed afterwards, they just sort of shake, and that seems to help calm them down. Okay, now to talk more about sort of the physiology of why trauma how trauma affects the body, let's talk about what's called the HPA axis. That's the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. And I'm going to share my screen and bring up a picture of the relationship among those 3 areas. Okay, here we see a little picture of the brain. And at the bottom of the brainstem is what's called the hypothalamus. It's just a small gland, and what it does is it produces, when there's a stressful situation, it produces a hormone called corticotropic releasing hormone. And that will go down to the pituitary gland, which also produces a hormone called and I need my piece of paper so I can make sure I pronounce it correctly, the adrenocorticotropic hormone. And then that hormone gets into the bloodstream, gets down to the kidneys, and then stimulates the adrenal gland to produce cortisol. Now, other terms for the adrenocorticotropic hormone are things like adrenaline and noradrenaline, but they are basically the same, the ACTH. Now, the cortisol hormone causes various kinds of metabolic effects, as it says on the picture. And these include things such as releasing energy stores in the form of glucose or breaking down the fats in order to have the person or animal ready to flee or to have energy to fight. So that is the cycle to get the animal or person ready to do what it needs to do in the stressful situation. Now, eventually there will be a certain level of cortisol in the bloodstream. And once it gets to a certain level, the hypothalamus and another area of the brain called the hippocampus will then turn off the production of the CRH, so as to sort of calm down the whole system. Unless a person is under just repetitive stress, and then this cycle keeps going and going and going. And for example, if say you have a doctor who thinks that you may be always constantly under stress, the doctor may test for your cortisol levels just to see if you are just being under stress all the time. Okay. So trauma causes stress, and therefore, when there's a traumatic situation, the HPA axis will take effect. Now, there are other things that will happen, which we'll talk about in another session, but I want to give you a brief demonstration of kind of how stress and trauma work on the brain beyond the HPA axis. So here's a model of your brain. Now, I know it's just my 2 hands, but bear with me. Okay, we're only going to talk about half the brain, so we'll take away this half. Now, the brain's held, the 2 halves, there's this thing called the corpus callosum between the 2 halves. Well, we'll just pretend we're taking away half the brain. Now, we explode open the brain. there's this view that the brain is basically in three parts. We have lower brain stem down here, which is the more primitive part of the brain. It has a lot of effects with regard to taking care of ourselves, eating, drinking, procreating. And down here is the area where you will find the hypothalamus and the pituitary. So they're down here in the let's get out of here or fight area. Now, the middle part of the brain here is what we call the mammalian brain. And most of the emotional centers are in this area. And the emotional responses to whatever's being fed from down here. Now, interestingly enough, this part of the brain responds to input like danger input way before the human part of the brain, which is the cerebral cortex. Now, the cerebral cortex is the part of the brain that lets us make plans, change how we're going to do things, be thoughtful, and come up with how to get out of situations in a safe way. But the thing is, it's offline when something scary happens. Okay, we're like this. Something scary comes, like big bear or something. Cerebral cortex goes offline. We go, oh my God, gotta run away. And then a slight time later, cerebral cortex will come back in and say, oh, what shall we do? How should we get out of this? And that's how that sort of cycle of the brain works. Now, next time when we meet again, I will explain how other aspects of the brain work, especially in regards to firing of neurons, wiring, and how triggers are made. So that's what's going to come in the future. But now, to wrap up, I mentioned I was going to talk about a new technique for helping with anxiety and helping alleviate stress. There have actually been studies that show that this technique helps with PTSD. It's called emotional freedom technique. Now, some people just call it tapping, and that's a big part of it. There are certain points where one taps, like for 5 seconds at each point, and it's up here, 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 under the eyes, under the nose, on the chin, on the collarbones, under the ribs, like that. And you're supposed to do karate chomps. But I will now show you a little picture of where they all are. Excuse me while I try to find it. I'm still trying to find it. There it is. Sorry about that. Okay, these are the places where one taps for the emotional freedom technique. Top of the head, on the eyebrows, side of the eye or under the eye, under the nose, the chin, collarbone, under the arms, and like there. And you can use your hands like that or your fingers. Now, the important thing while one is tapping like that is to give oneself positive affirmations or messages about the situation in which one is feeling scared. So, for example, say I was afraid of a dog. I would say, this dog is gentle. I am brave. I am over this situation. And I would repeat those affirmations as I tap in each place. the repetition of the statements, the affirmations, helps me to sort of rewire my brain about my fear. And the tapping helps distract me to a certain extent from my fear. It kind of helps calm me down. And so this is a very good technique when one is feeling sort of overwhelmed and scared. But the important thing is to also use the affirmations. And I will put a link in the description giving more a place where you can find more information about EFT and its uses. But for today, that's enough information, I think, for you to get started with it. So if this has been a useful video for you, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and I'll let you know when the next one comes around. So thank you very much for watching, and take care. Bye.